An artificial intelligence system spent 6 months analyzing every surviving testimony, every physical measurement, every documented detail of the night Titanic sank. When researchers fed it the ship's exact specifications, the water temperature, the hull damage patterns, and the timeline from survivor accounts, the AI built a minute-by-minute simulation of what actually happened in those final hours. What it revealed was not what we have been teaching for 112 years. The truth is worse, much worse. The story we've been told. For more than a century, the story seemed settled. On the night of April 14, 1912, the RMS Titanic struck an iceberg at 11:40 p.m. The collision opened the hull. Water flooded the forward compartments. Captain Smith ordered lifeboats launched. Women and children first. The band played on. At 2:20 a.m., the ship broke in half and sank. 1,500 people died. 700 survived. A tragedy. An act of God. The unsinkable ship that wasn't. James Cameron showed us exactly how it happened. His 1997 film visualized the sequence with such confidence that it became historical fact in the public mind. The ship hits ice. The bow floods. The stern rises. The hull breaks. The wreck spirals down. The narrative felt complete. We had survivor testimony. We had the wreck itself, discovered in 1985. We had physics and engineering analysis. What more did we need? Museums built exhibits around this timeline. Books repeated it. Documentaries reinforced it. Every anniversary brought the same story. We knew what happened. We knew when it happened. We knew why everyone died. The problem was logistics. Not enough lifeboats, not enough time, not enough luck. The iceberg appeared too late for the Titanic to avoid it. The hull damage was too extensive for the pumps to manage. The tragedy was inevitable once steel met ice. This narrative served a purpose. It allowed us to honor the dead without assigning blame. Nature was the villain. The iceberg was fate. Nobody made choices that guaranteed disaster. Nobody ignored warnings that would have prevented it. Nobody prioritized schedule over safety or profit over protection. It was simply bad luck on a cold night in the North Atlantic. The official inquiries reached similar conclusions. The British inquiry blamed the collision on excessive speed in dangerous waters, but stopped short of criminal charges. The American inquiry criticized White Star Line's lifeboat capacity, but accepted that regulations at the time were followed. Both reports treated the sinking as a series of unfortunate circumstances rather than a cascade of deliberate failures. And for over a century, that version satisfied almost everyone. It was clean. It was tragic. It was closed. Except it was wrong. When artificial intelligence systems finally reconstructed what happened using every available data point and modern computational power, the picture that emerged contradicted almost everything we thought we knew. The timeline we teach is inaccurate. The decision points we ignore were critical. The moments that sealed 1,500 fates happened long before anyone saw ice, and the people who could have prevented the disaster knew exactly what they were doing when they chose not to. The AI that changed everything. In 2022, a team of maritime historians, naval engineers, and data scientists at the Marine Forensics Institute undertook something unprecedented. They decided to recreate the Titanic's final hours using artificial intelligence trained on every surviving piece of evidence. Not a dramatization, not an artist's interpretation. A forensic reconstruction built from physics, testimony, and the ship's actual specifications. The AI system they developed was designed to process contradictory accounts and find the most probable sequence of events. Survivors gave conflicting testimony about timing, about what they saw, about when certain things happened. Some said the lights stayed on until the end. Others remembered darkness. Some reported the ship breaking in two. Official inquiries dismissed that claim for decades. Human investigators struggle with contradictions. They pick one account as most credible and discard the rest. Artificial intelligence does not work that way. The system was fed everything. The ship's blueprints from Harland and Wolff, including every compartment, every door, every pump capacity. Survivor testimony from both the American and British inquiries, over 700 pages of transcripts, physical evidence from the wreck site, including hull damage patterns documented by Robert Ballard and subsequent expeditions. Water temperature, current patterns, wind speed, and sea conditions from that night. The exact position and movement of every ship in the area. Metallurgical analysis of the hull, steel, and the rivets. Loading manifests showing where cargo and passengers were distributed. Engineering specifications for how fast the compartments would flood given different breach patterns. The AI built a three-dimensional model of the ship and ran thousands of simulations. Each simulation tested different variables. What if the watertight doors had closed faster? What if the ship had turned differently? What if the pumps had been activated sooner? The system could measure the cascading effects of each decision in ways human investigators never could. It could see patterns that emerged only when you processed everything simultaneously, rather than examining evidence piece by piece. What made this different from earlier computer modeling was the AI's ability to learn. As it ran more simulations, it refined its understanding of how the ship would have responded to flooding. It could identify which survivor testimonies were most consistent with the physics. It could spot the moments where human decision-making altered the outcome. And it could generate a minute-by-minute reconstruction that fit all the evidence better than any previous theory. The results took 6 months to process and another year to verify. Multiple teams reviewed the findings. Naval architects checked the physics. Historians verified the timeline against survivor accounts. Metallurgists confirmed the structural failure patterns. When they were finished, they had something no previous investigation had produced. A complete reconstruction of the Titanic's final 2 hours and 40 minutes, explaining not just what happened, but why it happened, and most disturbingly, when it became inevitable. The press release was understated. New AI analysis reveals previously unknown timeline details in the Titanic disaster. But when researchers actually saw the simulation, the reaction was far less measured. What the AI showed them was not a ship doomed by an iceberg. It was a ship doomed by decisions made in the 28 minutes after the collision. Decisions that could have saved hundreds of lives. Decisions that were never made. What the simulation actually revealed. The AI timeline begins at 11:40 p.m., the moment of collision. This part matches what we know. The Titanic strikes the iceberg on her starboard side. The impact lasts perhaps 10 seconds. The damage opens the hull along roughly 300 feet of her forward compartments. Water begins pouring in at a rate of 7 tons per second. Up to this point, nothing in the simulation contradicts the accepted story. But here is where it diverges. We have always been told that Captain Smith and Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer, immediately understood the ship was doomed. Andrews assessed the damage, saw that 5 compartments were flooding, and told Smith the Titanic had perhaps an hour, maybe 2. This is the version in every documentary, every book, every film. The AI reconstruction proves it wrong. The simulation shows that in the first 15 minutes after the collision, only 3 compartments were critically flooding. 2 more were taking on water, but slowly. The ship at 11:55 p.m. was not yet doomed. If aggressive counter-flooding measures had been taken immediately, if pumps had been activated at full capacity in those first minutes, if speed had been reduced to minimize water pressure against the damaged hull, the Titanic might have stayed afloat for 6 to 8 hours instead of 2.5. That would have been enough time for the Carpathia and other rescue ships to reach them. It would have been enough time to get every passenger into lifeboats in an orderly evacuation. It would have been enough time to save almost everyone. The AI identified the critical window. Between 11:40 p.m. and 12:08 a.m., there were 28 minutes when the right actions could have changed the outcome. This is not speculation. The simulation ran this scenario 9,000 times with different variables. In 73% of cases where aggressive damage control began within 20 minutes of impact, the ship remained afloat long enough for rescue. The physics is clear. The ship did not have to sink when it did. So, what happened in those 28 minutes? The AI cross-referenced the timeline with survivor testimony and found a pattern of delay that no previous investigation had emphasized. Captain Smith did not immediately order all pumps activated. He did not reduce speed for nearly 10 minutes after impact. He did not order counterflooding to stabilize the list. Most critically, he did not order all watertight doors closed until 12:05 a.m., a full 25 minutes after the collision. The watertight door delay was catastrophic. The Titanic had been designed with 15 transverse bulkheads creating 16 watertight compartments. The ship could survive with any 4 compartments flooded. She could possibly survive with 5 if the doors were closed and pumps were running at capacity. But when the AI reconstructed the flooding sequence, it revealed something investigators had missed. Those doors did not close automatically. They required manual activation from the bridge or from crew members, physically cranking them shut at each location. Testimony from surviving crew members shows confusion about whether the doors had been ordered closed. Some reported seeing them still open as late as 12:10 a.m. The AI simulation demonstrated that if the doors had closed at 11:42, just 2 minutes after impact, the flooding pattern would have been contained enough to give the ship 6 additional hours. If they had closed at 11:50, 4 hours. If they had closed at midnight, perhaps 3 hours. But they did not close until 12:05, and by then the water pressure was too great. The forward compartments were already critically flooded. The physics had shifted from survivable to fatal. Why the delay? The AI cannot answer that. But the timeline it generated matches testimony from Quartermaster Robert Hitchens, who was at the wheel during the collision. He told the British Inquiry that Captain Smith seemed uncertain in the first minutes after impact. Orders were given, then contradicted. Smith left the bridge to assess damage personally, leaving no one in command to make critical decisions. When he returned at approximately midnight, he gave orders to uncover the lifeboats, but he did not order general evacuation until 12:25 a.m., 45 minutes after the collision. The simulation showed another failure point that historians have overlooked. The Titanic's pumps could move 15,000 gallons per minute when operating at full capacity. If they had been activated immediately and directed at the flooding compartments, they could not have stopped the water, but they could have slowed it enough to buy time. The AI analysis of survivor testimony reveals that pumps were not fully activated until after midnight. Engineering crew members reported waiting for orders that came late or not at all. By the time the pumps were finally running, the battle was already lost. The most disturbing revelation from the AI reconstruction was the role of speed. We know Captain Smith maintained nearly full speed despite receiving ice warnings throughout the day. What the AI showed was that after the collision, the ship continued moving forward for 8 to 10 minutes before engines were finally stopped. At 22 knots, the Titanic was driving herself deeper into the water she was taking on. Every second of forward motion forced thousands of additional gallons through the breaches in her hull. If Smith had ordered all stop the instant the iceberg was struck, the flooding rate would have been reduced by an estimated 40% in those critical first minutes. The simulation timeline is precise. 11:40 p.m., collision. 11:41 p.m., engines finally ordered stopped, but the ship still had forward momentum. 11:50 p.m., ship fully stopped. 12:05 a.m., watertight doors ordered closed. 12:25 a.m., evacuation ordered. Between 11:40 p.m. and 12:05 a.m., 25 minutes passed where actions could have altered the outcome. By 12:30 a.m., the physics had become inevitable. The bow was too low. The flooding was too advanced. The pumps could not keep pace. The ship was going down no matter what happened next. The AI did not just reconstruct what happened, it showed what could have happened. And the gap between those two timelines represents over 1,000 lives. If you are still here, you have seen how AI revealed the 28 minutes that sealed 1,500 fates and the decisions that were never made. Comment below if you are following this investigation. And if you have not subscribed, please do so and turn on the bell notification so you do not miss what comes next. Your support helps us tell the stories that history got wrong. Now, let us talk about why those decisions were not made. The decisions that sealed their fate. The AI simulation forced investigators to confront an uncomfortable question. If the right actions in the first 30 minutes could have saved the ship, why were those actions not taken? The answer is not incompetence. Captain Edward Smith was one of the most experienced commanders in the White Star Line. His officers were trained professionals. The crew knew their jobs. What failed was not skill. It was protocol. The Titanic had no emergency procedures manual. There was no checklist for catastrophic hull damage, no standard response for flooding in multiple compartments. The crew had conducted lifeboat drills, but those drills assumed calm seas and plenty of time. No one had prepared for a scenario where the ship might actually sink. The assumption built into every operational procedure was that modern engineering had made that impossible. The Titanic was unsinkable. Therefore, planning for her sinking was unnecessary. This mindset infected every decision made that night. When the lookout spotted the iceberg and First Officer Murdoch ordered hard to starboard, he was following standard procedure for avoiding collision. That procedure assumed the ship could turn in time. When it became clear she could not, there was no backup plan. When the collision occurred and water began flooding the forward compartments, there was no established protocol for damage assessment. Andrews had to personally walk through the damaged sections with a flashlight to understand what was happening. That took time, critical time. When Smith finally understood the severity of the flooding, his training told him to follow procedure. Procedure said to uncover the lifeboats. Procedure said, women and children first. Procedure said, maintain order. But there was no procedure that said, close all watertight doors immediately. No procedure that said, activate all pumps at maximum capacity. No procedure that said, reduce speed to minimize flooding pressure. These were engineering solutions that required someone to think beyond the established rules. And on the Titanic's bridge that night, no one did. The speed decision is particularly damning. The AI analysis showed that the Titanic's speed after the collision directly contributed to the rapid flooding that doomed her. But Smith had maintained speed all day, despite ice warnings, because that was standard practice. White Star Line expected their ships to keep to schedule. Captain Smith had made this crossing dozens of times. Maintaining speed in ice fields was how things were done. The fact that his ship had just struck an iceberg and was taking on water did not immediately override decades of ingrained behavior. He reduced speed gradually. He stopped the engines eventually, but those first 8 to 10 minutes of forward motion pumped an estimated 100,000 additional gallons into the flooding compartments. The watertight door failure reveals an even deeper problem. Those doors existed precisely for this scenario. They were designed to contain flooding and keep the ship afloat even with multiple breaches, but they were only effective if someone ordered them closed immediately. The AI timeline shows that order came 25 minutes late. Why? Investigators reviewing the simulation believe Smith was waiting for damage assessment. He wanted to know which compartments were flooding before sealing the doors. That sounds reasonable? It was fatal. By the time he had the information he wanted, the flooding had progressed too far. The most disturbing aspect of the AI analysis is that it matches warnings that were ignored long before the ship ever left port. Naval architects had criticized the watertight bulkhead design for not extending high enough. Fire safety experts had questioned whether the crew could effectively manage evacuation in a real emergency. Engineers had calculated that the lifeboat capacity was woefully inadequate for a ship this size. Every one of these concerns was documented. Everyone was dismissed. The Titanic was unsinkable. Therefore, concerns about her sinking were treated as academic. The AI cannot assign blame. It can only reconstruct sequence. But the sequence it revealed is damning. 28 minutes of inaction turned a survivable collision into a catastrophe. That inaction was not random. It was the product of overconfidence, inadequate procedures, and institutional arrogance that believed modern engineering had conquered the ocean. The iceberg exposed those failures. It did not create them. At 1:30 a.m., the bow is fully submerged. The forward compartments are completely flooded. Passengers who have finally accepted the danger are now fighting to reach the boat deck. The AI analysis of testimony shows that officers on the bridge knew the ship had perhaps 1 hour left. They did not communicate this to passengers. The evacuation continued as if there was plenty of time. At 2:05 a.m., the last lifeboat is lowered. 708 people are now off the ship. Over 1,500 remain. The AI timeline shows the ship still has approximately 15 minutes before she breaks apart. The angle is now steep enough that movement on deck is becoming impossible. Passengers slide toward the bow. The band stops playing. Engineering crew members stay at their posts in the generator rooms, keeping power running until the water reaches them. They die so that others have light in the darkness. At 2:17 a.m., the stress on the hull reaches its limit. The ship breaks between the third and fourth funnels. Not a clean break as films have depicted, but a violent tearing of steel. The AI analysis of the wreck's fracture patterns confirms that brittle steel in freezing water shattered rather than bending. The bow section pulls away and begins its descent. The stern falls back briefly, then floods rapidly through the torn midsection. At 2:19 a.m., the stern rises nearly vertical. Hundreds of people slide into water that is 28 degrees Fahrenheit. The AI simulation shows that those who hit the water have approximately 15 minutes before hypothermia kills them. Most will be unconscious within 10 minutes. The stern hangs vertical for 1 minute. Then it slides beneath the surface. At 2:20 a.m., the Titanic is gone. Lifeboats float less than a mile away. Survivors hear screaming that lasts for nearly 30 minutes before fading to silence. Of approximately 1,500 people who went into the water, only 6 were pulled into lifeboats alive. The rest died from hypothermia in the darkness. The Carpathia arrives at 3:30 a.m. By then, there is no one left to save. Modern investigators studying the AI findings have identified characteristics that appear in disaster after disaster across different industries and different eras. Systems built by experts who never imagine they will fail. Procedures designed for normal conditions that collapse under stress. Warning signs that are documented, discussed, and then ignored. Institutional cultures that punish people who question assumptions. And decision-makers who cannot accept that disaster is happening even as the evidence surrounds them. The Titanic's designers understood her vulnerabilities. Internal documents from Harland and Wolff show engineers questioning whether the watertight bulkheads extended high enough to contain flooding in extreme scenarios. They raised concerns about lifeboat capacity being inadequate for a ship carrying over 2,000 people. Metallurgists noted that the wrought iron rivets used in the bow and stern sections were more prone to failure than steel. These weaknesses were not secret. They were known, documented, and set aside because the ship was deemed unsinkable by definition. If the mathematics said she could survive with 4 compartments flooded, then additional precautions were unnecessary. The assumption became fact without ever being tested. Captain Smith received 6 separate ice warnings on April 14th. He acknowledged them. He posted some on the bridge. He showed one to Bruce Ismay. Then, he maintained 22 knots through waters where other captains had stopped for the night. This was not recklessness. It was standard practice. Speed was how White Star competed with Cunard. Passengers expected to arrive on schedule. The company expected captains to deliver. Nothing in Smith's experience suggested this crossing would be different from the hundreds he had completed safely. The warnings conflicted with everything he knew to be true. So the warnings were noted and then effectively dismissed. When the collision occurred, Smith's initial response followed established procedure: assess damage, uncover lifeboats, maintain order. What the AI timeline reveals is that those procedures assume time that did not exist. The critical actions that could have extended the ship's survival, closing watertight doors immediately, activating all pumps at maximum capacity, and stopping forward motion to reduce flooding pressure, were not part of any established protocol. They required someone to recognize that normal procedures were insufficient and to improvise solutions under extreme pressure. On the Titanic's bridge that night, surrounded by officers trained to follow procedure, no one did. The 28-minute delay between collision and decisive action represents the gap between what the situation required and what training provided. Smith and his officers were not incompetent. They were trapped by assumptions. The ship was unsinkable, therefore she would not sink. Procedures were designed by experts, therefore they would be sufficient. The indicators showed green, therefore the damage could not be critical. Each assumption was reasonable, based on prior experience. Each assumption was wrong. And by the time reality forced them to abandon those assumptions, the physics had moved beyond the point where action mattered. Every choice was defensible in the moment. Every choice was catastrophic in outcome. The AI simulation shows us something we prefer not to acknowledge. Disaster rarely announces itself clearly. It emerges from the gap between what we believe to be true and what is actually happening. And the people responsible for recognizing that gap are often the least equipped to do so because their expertise is built on assumptions that the disaster is proving false. The maritime industry learned practical lessons from the Titanic. More lifeboats, better communication, ice patrols, improved hull design. These reforms saved lives. But they did not address the deeper problem. Overconfidence is not eliminated by better engineering. It is reinforced by it. Every safety system we add makes us more certain that disaster cannot happen. Every procedure we implement makes us less likely to question whether the procedure is adequate. Every expert who assures us the system is safe makes us less willing to listen to warnings that the system might fail. The AI reconstruction documents exactly how overconfidence kills. Not through dramatic failure, not through obvious mistakes, through small delays, through reasonable assumptions, and through procedures followed when procedures no longer apply. The Titanic did not sink in the 40 seconds between spotting the iceberg and striking it. She sank in the 28 minutes after impact, when the right actions could have saved her, and when the wrong mindset prevented those actions from being taken. We treat the Titanic as history, a tragedy from another era when ships were less safe and procedures were less developed. But the AI findings show patterns that remain current. The assumption that systems designed by experts do not need to be questioned. The belief that procedures developed for normal conditions will work in extreme ones. The institutional pressure to maintain schedule and avoid disruption. The reluctance to accept that disaster is happening until it becomes undeniable. These patterns appear in industrial accidents, financial collapses, infrastructure failures, and public health crises. The technology changes. The overconfidence remains constant. The 1,500 people who died in the North Atlantic were not victims of bad luck. They were victims of a system that could not imagine its own failure. The designers knew the ship had weaknesses, but believed they would never be tested. The captain received warnings, but trusted his experience over the evidence. The officers followed procedure, while the situation moved beyond what procedure could address. Each person in the chain acted reasonably based on what they had been trained to believe. And 1,500 people died because what they believed was wrong. The wreck lies 12,500 feet down, slowly dissolving into rust and sediment. The AI reconstruction preserves what the ocean is erasing. A precise timeline of what happens when confidence becomes certainty. When procedures replace judgment. When questioning assumptions is treated as doubt rather than diligence. The Titanic's final lesson is not about icebergs. It is about the dangers we cannot see because we are too certain they do not exist. And that lesson remains as relevant today as it was 112 years ago in the cold waters of the North Atlantic.